Thank you very much and good afternoon to all. And I will be sharing a few learnings on resilience building based on the kind of work that is being done in India with the help of Adaptation Fund Board and NABARD. These are few 10 to 12 slides, and through these slides I will be talking about a project which is on adaptation project which is ongoing in Uttarakhand state of India. And there are 10 villages where we have introduced a set of multi-sectoral interventions, and the project duration was initially 4 years, but that has been extended, and almost it is now almost it is 5-year plus interventions that we will be talking about. So the whole purpose of sharing about this project is this can be treated like a caselet, and just to understand how the resilience building effort has been taken up, and also what parameters or metrics we use for assessing the resilience. So whether our project is on right track or not, which parameters we focus, I will be talking about that. So the setting of this project is vulnerable districts of Northwestern Himalayas, which is Champawat district in Uttarakhand, which is adjacent state to Nepal also. And the project focus was on the small and marginal farming communities. And why small and marginal farming communities? Because they have sole dependence on climate sensitive livelihood support systems. Like majority of them are dependent on agriculture, livestock, forest-based resources for their livelihoods. So as a part of this adaptation project, lot of exercise was being done first to understand the vulnerability of the farming communities in this region, and we tried to map various climatic hazards. Also, the hazard prioritization was also done. Based on that, the impacts were understood, the sectoral implications of climate change and climate variability were understood, and also the coping strategies, existing coping strategies. Based on all of these, we arrived at various pathways. So just to give this example, like one of the important sectoral effects was water scarcity, or less of water, which was new in case of Himalaya, this part of Himalaya. There were many discussions about what is the exact nature of water scarcity. Also, there was, because of the land degradation, NRM degradation, natural resources, scarcity of water. Also, there were very few options for income diversification or risk diversification, which we treat as an adaptation pathway, and overall low productivity of cattle agriculture. So based on these vulnerabilities and sectoral effect, we identified certain technology interventions or planned multi-sectoral interventions. Like also there was a lot of effect on biodiversity of that region. People were not having any support services or advisory services also about the weather forecast in the form of weather forecast or weather-based crop advisory. There was total kind of absence of crop diversification effort. The traditional crops were being cultivated, like potato, paddy, and wheat. These were being cultivated year after year. And apart from that, there was in general degradation of existing natural resources because of the heavy rainfall and also extreme climate events. So in the light of that, what we identified was a family level, village level intervention in the form of a model. So that model had pathways like water management, strengthening livelihoods around crops and livestock, and also strengthening natural resources, be it biodiversity or be it fodder or be it community pastoral land or one panchayats. So ecological restoration of those lands also. So with the help of all these multiple interventions, the focus was on how to make the communities resilient. I mean, not only the communities, but also the setting or the natural resources, how to make them resilient. And for that, the whole focus was to address the vulnerabilities in the form of limited water, limited fodder, degrading base of natural resources. So all that was focused. So this we can see these are all interrelated, because essentially we are talking about small and marginal farmers, and they have crop and livestock based economy, as well as they are totally dependent on their surrounding forest or one panchayats or the other resources that are there like springs. So around we tried to work on the local resources. It was natural local resource based planning focused on the families. There are 800 families that are being focused, and the whole focus was on resilience building. And how we achieved that, I will show you next slide. So once these multi-sectoral interventions with blending science and technology and social engineering processes we introduced, these resulted in several achievements. I will not go into each one of that, but there are various type of kind of achievements that were resulted. So now how we captured that, whether to find out whether we are on right track or not. So yeah, so these are some of the indicative impacts. Like through our interventions, we aimed at creating some positive economic impact, social impact, and ecological impact. So the economic impact was necessarily at the level of families who were participating. Social impact was more at the level of village and communities and people's organization or community-based groups. And ecological impact was more at the level of area or the region or a landscape. So this is the type of impact that we wanted to achieve. And for that, several interventions were made in the form of, improved horticulture or cultivation under protected condition, rooftop rainwater harvesting. And in terms of social impact, it was, collective actions, involvement of hill women, like gender sensitive approach. And ecological impact was working on their common property resources like one panchayat, springs, forest. So that is what was being aimed at. So this particular slide is very important, and it is little complex also. So through our program, we tried to capture the resilience building process in this format. Like as I said, certain resilience building processes were aimed at individual farmer or household level, which is the foundation of this triangle. Second one is at farming community level. So group of farmers or a group of livestock holders. So it was at a village level. And third one was at an agriculture system level, where we tried to diversify agriculture system and make it resilient by introducing several other interventions or optimal resource utilization of crops and livestock. While doing that, we tried to aim at economic resilience, social resilience, and environmental resilience. And the whole thing was achieved by diversification of income options, diversification of risks also, because in case of risk, if there is only dependence on crop-based system, then the risk is more. So we tried to diversify risk also. We created long-term reserves in the area like water, fodder, some ecosystem services also, and also some additional interventions in the form of climate information, better preparedness, collective response. These processes were also adopted. Apart from that, some enabling environment, that was the kind of cross-cutting, that was a continuous process. So the economic impact or the resilience, some of the metrics or parameters we used was stability of livelihood for the community staying there, enhancement of income or at least sustained income, not going back to poverty trap, financial capital, additional financial capital available or assets created, and low input to livelihood. So in the sense that there is sufficient kind of available resources for taking care of their livelihoods also. In terms of environmental sustainability, we focused on ecosystem integrity, biodiversity in the region, natural resource, health of natural resource or environment enrichment processes, and overall carrying capacity. So these were some of the metrics. In social, it was equity, gender, inclusive approaches, social mobility, and participatory approaches. So the unique socio-technological model that has evolved through this project is to mitigate the impacts of climate change and increasing the climate change resilience. So while working, we felt that if it is a family level, they need resilience of agriculture, also water reserves, also optimum productive livestock resources, and also a very good forest. So these were some of the technological interventions, and within that, lot of interventions were introduced. And at the social intervention level, it was, as I said, trust was on capacity building, community mobilization, participated processes, and also working with multiple stakeholders. So I will again. This is a too much textual slide, but the thing is, the whole purpose of sharing this slide is under each of the pillar, like environmental impact or environmental sustainability, economic impact or economic sustainability, social impact or social sustainability. There were again multiple of indicators or metrics. Like in economic, since livelihood was a focus, you can see the fodder production or livestock productivity, or the crop productivity or crop diversification. So these were the metrics. In environmental impact, it is other things, and in social impact, it is building climate resilience for the communities. So this is my second last slide. So the focus of climate change resilience was on adaptation. So we felt that resilience building requires, the climate change has given. So how to adapt with it rather than mitigation. So that was our framework that we use. And for adaptation, then we arrived at several interventions with which communities could adapt with the changing climate and climate variability. The focus was on making the communities as well as the ecosystem and their surrounding resources resilient, in the sense that there are no shocks, and even if there are shocks, they are able to take care. And at various levels, from micro to macro level, that is from family, household to, as I said, village, and also at the ecosystem level. So these type of levels we focus while building resilience. So this is my last slide. So just I wanted to share the type of interventions that we focused upon, and we felt that the resilience building is very complex process, and resilience building requires a multi-sectoral, region-specific interventions at micro and macro level, including at family level to village level, community level to ecosystem level, and it has to have resilience building pathways like economic sustainability, social sustainability, and ecosystem sustainability or ecological sustainability. So these, and around that there are small sub indicators and set of metrics that we can choose and pick to decide whether we are on right path or not. So for each of these, we had a certain baseline data, and against baseline data, there was some target that was decided to be achieved in 5 years. And we were tracking our progress, whether those targets have been achieved or not. For example, MCM of water, suppose baseline was 5 MCM. So our target was 50 MCM. So whether we have been able to achieve that or not, and if 50 MCM water is there in these particular 10 villages, we felt the community, we can call, it has helped resilience building of the community. So with this, I will stop. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to take it towards the end of this whole session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joshi. There is immediate questions related to your presentation. So maybe I would like to take these questions at the moment, if that is okay with you, Dr. Joshi.
Yeah, sure.
So this is a question from Dr. Prabhakar, and he says that, is there any concrete evidence whether resilience has been achieved? For example, how biodiversity has been enhanced during this short period of project period, and whether the biodiversity enhancement has contributed to resilience building?
Yeah. So, sir, yes, for each of the interventions, as I said, there were, for each of the intervention, there were baselines, and then there were like, what is the progress vis-a-vis those baseline indicators, the values. And so suppose like in case of biodiversity, like our focus was on niche crops, which are very, very unique to this geography, which are native tracks for, say, finger millet, or other many beans also, and rajma also. So we added when we completed the project, there were 28 different crops which were conserved, and these are sturdy in nature, and these are native. So we all know that in case of climate change, now resowing is required. Farmers have to purchase seeds again and again. So because of this biodiversity, they had control on their seeds, and these were the seeds which doesn't require to be sown year after year. I mean, there is a viability germination that is maintained. So I think to that extent, resilience was taken care of. because that much vulnerability was reduced and dependence on other seed companies was reduced. And also these are the seeds which are sturdy. As I said, these can sustain the low rainfall, or these can sustain the heat pressures because of their native traits. So to that extent, but there is no kind of proof, although it is kind of logic that we are following, but we have not tried to put it in mathematical model or so.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. There are also like a couple of other things, but I think we can take these suggestions and questions during our open discussions. Very good and good questions are coming up, which would be very relevant for our open discussion. So currently, I would like to now go to the second presentation, and I would like to request Dr. Jagannath Joshi sir to please deliver his presentation. So could you please share your screen?
Thank you, Erika ji. Let me share my. Could you please allow me to share the screen? Erika ji?
Yes, sir.
Able to share the screen?
It's done.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Next few minutes, I'm going to talk about the resilience assessment in Haryoban program, case studies from Chitwan and Banki districts of Nepal.
Excuse me, sir, could you please extend your slide?
Yeah. Excuse me. Could you please tell me again?
Full screen.
Full screen.
Full screen.
Slide full screen.
I had the full screen.
Maybe you can press F5.
We can see.
Yeah, F5.
F5, yes.
Sorry, what happened to this one?
I think what they are actually asking for is presentation mode. Yes, right where your arrow is. Click on the little symbol to the left of 66% at the bottom of the screen. And that should be presentation mode.
You are talking this one?
Now it says, yes, that one.
Is it okay?
Oh, it didn't switch.
I think you should go ahead, please. It's visible, probably. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Can you hear me?
You are audible.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this Haryoban program was supported by the United States government through the USAID in Chitwan Annapurna landscape and Tarai Arc landscape of Nepal. And the program was implemented by a consortium of 4 INGOs and NGOs. WWF Nepal was prime partner, and CARE Nepal, National Trust for Nature Conservation, and Federation of Community Forestry Users Nepal were other partners. So the resilience is integrated in the goal of this Haryoban program. Goal of the Haryoban program was increased ecological and community resilience in the Chitwan Annapurna landscape and Tarai Arc landscape. So in order to achieve this goal, Haryoban program has implemented a number of activities related to the biodiversity conservation, climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, gender equality and social inclusion, governance, and livelihood. So let me start with the concept of resilience. We all know that human and plant communities and ecological systems experience harmful effects or impacts, damage and destruction by shocks and stresses due to the dynamic nature of Earth's environment and human activities. And these human and plant communities and ecological systems have capacities to self-renew, recover from the negative changes, absorb shocks, adopt changing environmental conditions, and attain a better condition to combat future shocks and stresses. This is simply we call resilience. So resilience to one type of shock does not ensure resilience to others. That is our experience. So these shocks and stresses, we all know, sorry, what happened to my presentation? Erika ji?
Sir, your slides were not moving, so we are trying to share your screen from our end. Is that okay?
Okay, please.
So you are in this slide, right? Concept of resilience, right?
Could you please show this one? It is only the screen I am seeing.
We are presenting the concept of resilience at the moment.
Yeah, concept of resilience.
Yeah.
So can you open your Zoom so that you can see the slides?
Yeah. I have shared the presentation with Erika ji and she can share.
Yeah, we are sharing it.
So, sir, we are sharing from our end. So, to see this slides that we have shared, you have to open your Zoom and close your presentation.
I have to open my. I can't see the slides. Okay, let me.
Now?
Yes, now it's visible. Make it full
Can
screen.
you see? Can you see my slides? Can you see this one? Sorry. What happened to this one? Erika ji? Sorry.
We are again trying to share the slide.
Yeah, this is okay.
Visible now?
Yeah, it's visible now.
Okay, please continue.
Okay, we all know these shocks. What are these shocks and stresses? Common shocks in Nepal are floods, landslide, forest fires, hailstorms, crop diseases and pests, heat waves, cold waves, epidemics, etc. And common stresses, which are smaller, low impact events, include temperature rise, drought, erratic rainfall, soil erosion, invasive species, human-wildlife conflict, etc. Next, please. Erika ji, can you change? Okay. Okay. Since there are more than 70 definitions of resilience, which creates ambiguity on understanding of this concept to operationalize and empirically practice it on the ground. In general, a simple definition of resilience is the capacity to cope, learn, and even thrive in the face of adversity or hardship. So looking at different types of different definitions by different institutions and experts, our urban program has adopted, prepared or defined the resilience in this way. Resilience is the ability of vulnerable and poor people, households, communities, and ecological systems to absorb shock, maintain function in the face of external stresses, and adapt, recover, and evolve to deal with future shocks, stress, and impacts. This definition is based on the goal and objectives of the Haryoban program. So the definition of Haryoban program focuses on three key elements. First one is reducing drivers of vulnerabilities, risks, and threats. Second is building capacities and assets of individuals, household, communities, and ecosystems. And third one is improving the enabling governance, policy, and institutional environment. Next one. Next, please. Okay. Our Haryoban program prepared a holistic resilience framework in 2018. And it focuses on three key elements, as I already mentioned before. First one is tackling the drivers of vulnerabilities, risk, and threats in human and ecological systems. Second is building capacities and assets of individuals, household, communities, and ecosystem. And last or third one is improving the enabling governance, policy, and institutional environment. So based on these definitions, Haryoban program prepared a theory of change. And this theory of change is, if drivers of vulnerabilities, risk, and threats in human and ecological systems are reduced, and if the capacities of and assets of individuals, household, communities, and ecosystem to deal with the various shocks, stresses, and uncertainty are built and supported, and if these actions are supported by an enabling governance, policy, and institutional environment, then resilience is increased. Next, please. So this is the Haryoban program's resilience framework. You can see in the center, individuals, household, community, and ecosystems. We have to build the resilience of these individuals, household, and communities, and ecosystems. And in one hand, there are drivers of vulnerabilities, threats, and risk in human and ecological systems induced by climate change and other phenomena. And in order to minimize these vulnerabilities, threats, and risks, we have to consider different capacities and assets. We have to develop different capacities and assets. We have to build different capacities and assets. These include 4 capacities and 5 assets. These 4 capacities are anticipatory capacity, adaptive capacity, absorptive capacity, and transformative capacity. At the same time, we have to develop human resources, human assets, financial assets, social, physical, and natural assets also. So we need enabling environment, policy, institution, and governance in the place. So this framework is forward-looking risk assessment, considers forward-looking risk assessment. This is flexible to change, and this incorporates innovation through the learnings. This framework was adopted from the CARE International 2016 Increasing Resilience Guide Note, and Haryoban program has added the ecosystems resilience also in this framework. Next, please. So these are just the listing of the capacities and assets we are targeting. 4 capacities: anticipatory capacities, absorptive capacities, adaptive capacity, and transformative capacities. I have given some examples also. I think it will take time to if I read these things. And other 5 assets include the human potentials, social capital, economic resources, physical capitals, and natural resources. And improving the enabling governance, policy, and institutional environment include include the improved governance, conducive policy, and enabling institutions. Next, please. Okay, based on this framework, we have developed a resilience assessment methodology. So we identified major threats, vulnerabilities, and risks that are the shocks and stresses based on the threats and vulnerability or risk analysis, local adaptation plan of actions we have prepared earlier, and integrated sub-asset management plans. Then a resilience assessment matrix was developed based on the resilience framework I have just talked about. A list of key strategies adopted and corresponding key intervention and activities implemented to address these threats, vulnerabilities, and disaster risk was prepared. Indicators were developed. Checklist and questionnaire were prepared for the primary data collection from the field. Using the focus group discussion, key informant interviews, and other meetings with the different stakeholders. So 2 case studies were conducted, one in integrated sub-watershed management plan implementation site, that was in Khagerikola sub-watershed of Chitwan district, and another one is the local adaptation plan of action implemented site, that is in the Rapisonari rural municipality of Planket district. Data collection, data or information collection and analyze were collected and analyzed corresponding to each these indicators. So finally, we use the Likert scale to indicate activities contribution to resilience as negative or neutral or moderately positive or significantly positive. So these are the major key points of our methodology. Next, please. This is the resilience assessment matrix we have developed. This is resilience of local communities and ecosystem against the climatic hazards. In this matrix, you can see in the first column, I have given, this is in the first row, that major shocks, stresses, threats, and threats that were identified in the field, in the integrated sub-watershed management plan or local adaptation plan for action. And here is example of flood, river or stream bank cutting, and sedimentation. We have grouped these hazards together so that it will be easier for further analysis. So then in the first row, you can see in the next second column, strategies for the resilience building. What were the strategies that were implemented in the field for resilience building by the Hariyuban program? In the third column, the key activities implemented to reduce the threats and vulnerabilities and reduce the risks also. Then on the next column, we have expected results. Next is indicators. Which are the pertinent indicators to this one? And then what kind of questionnaire or checklist we have to use? Another next column is for answers from the field. Then we see the changes in status with regard to the results and indicators before the implementation of the Hariyuban program's activities and after the implementation of the Hariyuban program activities. We have collected all these data from field. Then we see the degree of change. We have prepared a scale of from 1 to 10, and we have divided this into 4 categories. One is if it is if it is 0 or there is no change, then it is negative. If there is 1 to 3, 3.9, then it is slightly positive. If it is from 4 to 6.9, okay, I will show this scale in the next slide. Anyway, we have developed this one. And then activities contribution to the resilience. How much it contributes to the resilience in increasement of the resilience. And we use Likert scale in this one. So last column is remarks. Next, please. These are the examples of indicators used to assess the resilience. So we have different indicators for different types of intervention activities and strategies. Next, please.
Joshi sir, we have limited time, so I would like to request to consider the time as well. We have like
Okay.
2 minutes left.
Yeah, okay. I will conclude soon. So how to determine the resilience, change in the resilience? And this is how we determine. If drivers of the threats, vulnerabilities, and risk are reduced, if the capacities and assets to address the threats, vulnerabilities, and risk are built and supported, and if these actions are supported by improved governance, conducive policy, and enabling situation, then we consider resilience increased. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, now let me show you the results. These are the just when we started our work in the field and how change can be seen in the field. Only one example here in the Kageri Pala sub-orchard. Please, next slide. So this is the result in the Kageri Pala sub-orchard regarding the resilience assessment. We have all data we have put together, analyzed them, and then do the given the different scale these, how can I say, the marks, and finally we have given we have taken the average of those different parameters average, and finally overall degree of change with respect to the hazards as a result of the Haryoban program supported strategies and activities. You can see 6.3. So this category is moderately positive. Here you can see the change of the degree of change may assessed or measured using a scale 1 to 10. 0 is negative, 1 to 3.5 is low, 4 to 7.9 is medium, and 8 to 10 is high. So in this scale, we found this is moderately positive. Next, please. Using the same method, we have prepared a summary of results of resilience assessment in Rapti-Sonari of Banke districts. And here also we found this scale is 5.4, and this is also moderately positive. So we concluded that Haryoban programs implemented activities has contributed moderately positive in resilience to increase the resilience. Next, please. Okay, thank you so much. It's last slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jagannath sir. We have like one specific questions related to the presentation by Veronica. May I ask these questions at the moment? Is
Please.
it okay for you?
Yeah.
So she says, like, did you find it hard for communities or policymakers to think about resilience as capacities for change rather than specific outcomes?
Yeah, it was really hard in the beginning, but we tried to convince them. We tried to make them to understand what this resilience is and how it is important. So finally, they were convinced and they were supportive to us.
Okay.
Any other questions, please?
There is no more questions at the moment. We can have further discussions during the open discussion session. Now I would like to go to the third presentation.
Thank you so much. Sorry, some technical mistake.
So this is a presentation from ICIMOD side, and on behalf of the team, myself, Erika Udas, and GM Sa will be presenting on resilience markers and approach to integrating resilience in resilience monitoring, evaluation, and learning in climate and development practice. Is this slide visible? Is my slide visible to all?
It was briefly, but now it's gone. Here it comes.
Okay, so next. So many of you might be aware about the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, which extends from Afghanistan in the west to Myanmar in the east, across the 8 countries. And here we really see lots of dynamics in terms of climate change and its impacts, hazards, and livelihood transitionings are happening from traditional modes to new income sources. And when we look into the drivers of change behind these kinds of livelihood transitions, then there are several key causal processes that links to climate change impacts, the hazards like floods, droughts, and landslides. And apart from that, the globalizations are also very much having the impact on changing the aspirations of youth in terms of migration and labor productivity, and the national policies from all these countries regarding the subsidies has also had some impact on the transitions in the livelihood system. So to understand these kinds of interdependent and interrelated key causal processes, we really need to think from the system's perspective to understand the complexity of the social ecological system and the respective trade-offs. So that is why we have used a system thinking approach to to conduct some of the case studies across the HKS countries. So in total, we have been doing 9 case studies across the HKS region. And today I will be particularly focusing on 3 of them. So one case study is from Dadeldhura in Nepal. The other one is in Ha in Bhutan. And the other case study is from Yeongsi, San State in Myanmar. So what we really saw from these case study is actually, in case of Bhutan, when we are looking into the very traditional type of nomadic lifestyle, which is very important in highland mountain farmers, that these kinds of a traditional yak herding is slowly converting into the change because of the youth aspirations that is leading the migration to the cities for more income generations and for higher education. And that has particularly led to the decline in these kind of traditional systems of yak herding. And we are particularly in this case study looking into the resilience of the yak-based livelihood in terms of these kinds of social dynamics and also the impact of climate change. In terms of Dadeldhura in Nepal, we are particularly looking into the transition from the traditional cereal crop conversion to vegetable farming. And this is also very much true in case of other mountain communities across the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, which is also led by the current market access, the demand for vegetables, as well as the agriculture feminization, and vegetable farming require less labor than the cereal crop farming, as well as the increasing human-wildlife conflict that is leading these kinds of transition in the livelihood system. So in this case study, we are particularly looking into the agri-based livelihood system, the resilience of this, and how these could be resilient to the intended market shocks in terms of price or in terms of climate impacts such as droughts, where vegetable requires more irrigation than compared to the mountain cereal crops, which require less water and are drought resistant. Likewise, in Myeongsi, in the San state of Myanmar, the case study particularly looked into the agri-based farm system, particularly with the farmers were farming the ginger-based agriculture livelihood, shifting to a secondary vocational livelihood, such as bamboo-based handicraft, which is particularly a project-based shift in the livelihood system that has changed the aspirations of the farmers to have this secondary vocation taken up due to higher income opportunities, but lacking the resources, the limited resources that is required for these kind of a secondary vocational, where we are particularly looking into the resilience of energy dependent non-farm occupation, and looking into how the hazards could have impact in the resilience of these transitions. So we have used the 5 steps system thinking approach methodology to understand and assess the resilience from the case studies. So the conceptual modeling, which is where we particularly look into the problem statement and assess the historical behavior of our socio-ecological system and how interrelated and interdependent are these socio-ecological systems, looking into the causal loop. And then having done this conceptual modeling, we are also validating that with the concerned stakeholders to understand whether the nature of feedbacks that are having impact on these socio-ecological complexities are being considered or not. And after that, we are particularly looking into the stock flow model, where we identify the reference mode and also simulate where we have scenarios that are there to validate. So these kinds of scenario development and simulations happens that could help us identify the resilient future pathway and help identify the change areas that could lead to identify the markers of resilience and how we are going to integrate that into the monitoring and evaluation learning system and use it as a decision support tool. So these 5 steps are very much iterative process and reflexive at each other. So we can always go back and again repeat the process after we, unless we have the nature of feedbacks that are there in the social ecological system that have been captured. So with the modeling of the case studies, what we have found from our model testing, particularly looking into the business as usual scenario in case of Bhutan, is that the changing youth aspirations, as I already mentioned before, has triggered the decline in the traditional yak herding practices, and also the yak populations are decreasing. So the low yak revenue due to the lack of product diversification and market linkages has also led to increase in youth aspiration to migrate to cities. And this has actually declined the yak industry and might gradually lead this to a collapse. In case of Dadeldhura, the business's usual scenario says that the change in the cropping pattern, particularly from traditional drought-resistant crops such as maize and finger millet to vegetables, this has led to increase in income of the household. But this is also to a certain limit, because in Dadeldhura is in the far western region, and there are scarcity of water for irrigation. So considering the higher demand for water in case of vegetable farming, so there will be a limit of the resources, and given the increasing climate change impacts and the increasing frequency of drought, so that might lead in future to really collapse these kinds of vegetable-based livelihood system. The third case on Myanmar, so shifting from the agri-based livelihood to a secondary vocational livelihood system, which is more profitable and also increase the livelihood. But these kinds of increased aspirations of changing the livelihood would also lead to some of the constraint of the resources. For example, if these kinds of secondary vocational livelihoods require energy demand, then these could lead to a constraint of energy lack, and the existing energy poverty would again lead to the economic collapse. So what we found is particularly the feedbacks in the socio-ecological system and the shift actually from the traditional livelihood to the changes in the higher income livelihood sources are particularly giving us the opportunity to look at the various options at a short time giving higher income, but at a longer run it might lead to the system collapse. The second model testing, what we did is also we had like some policy scenarios that we have tested for building the resilience. And what we found is particularly in case of Bhutan, if we focus the policy on the development of local yak-based enterprises, then there will be possibilities that the youth will remain in the villages to generate income, and will be able to continue this traditional practice of livelihood system. Likewise, the safety nets of the yak herders are also very much important, where when we talk about the climate change impacts and the hazards that are being affected, and also the insurance scheme. So these kinds of safety nets are also very much important to build the resilience of these livelihood, the traditional livelihood system. And yak as one of the livelihood option. So instead of abandoning that, it is also recommended to have like rather than completely relying on it, we can diversify this livelihood system and link it to the entrepreneurship system. In case of Nepal also, the policy support, particularly on drought-resistant cereal crops, are being highly recommended here to build the resilience, because when we only focus on vegetable farming, then the system will collapse. So crop diversification is one of the area where we have to focus on to build the resilience. Likewise, the infrastructure for irrigation and the efficient use of water is also very much important when we have these kind of crop diversification. And the last thing is also like ecological awareness to the farmers is also very much important to have understood, like why the crop diversification is very much important for ecological and social resilience at this in this case study. For the Myanmar case, like maintaining diversity between farm and non-farm enterprises is very much important here to build the resilience, and policy, particularly with the access to energy with grid or the connection with the decentralized smart grid system, that would also support the secondary vocational livelihood system that could diversify the livelihood option and also address to the resource scarcity in terms of energy poverty. And it is very important to understand these kinds of interlinkages between the aspiration market and the resources. So with this implementation, like with these scenarios of policy support and interventions, the systems which was supposed to have been collapsed in future, we can have built resilience of it. When we are looking into all these three case studies together, we found three interdependent change areas which could manage the socio-ecological resilience and also address the collapse of the livelihood system. So the first change area is actually a generic one, and this change area has been observed in all the three cases, where we see that the livelihood transition is taking place from one livelihood system to higher income livelihood system, but that is leading to increased vulnerability, where communities will have exposure to higher vulnerabilities, and the system might be collapsing at a longer run. And the second area of change is particularly very case specific and also depend on the context. And as I also mentioned earlier, that labor availability and productive labor is something which is very much linked with these kinds of livelihood system, and transition from one livelihood system to another livelihood system would really have effect in these labor dynamics. So, for example, when we are talking about Bhutan case, when the youth aspirations are changing and they are shifting or migrating to cities, then there is shortage in labor for yak herding and going to high mountains during the summertime in the pasture land. So this has really affected the farm yak herding and the yak industry. The change area 3 is particularly addressing the trade-off between these kinds of aspiration of having higher income and also increasing vulnerability while transitioning from one livelihood system to another livelihood system. And it is also very much important how important it is to see these change areas to be linked with the M&A system. And now I would like to request my colleague to present further.
Thank you, Erika. So, in response to the systems dynamics, the changes we foresee as a result of the changing dynamics is and when we implement these approaches. So, we identified those change areas. Now, the fundamental challenge is how to basically incorporate those change areas into the monitoring and evaluation system to basically navigate and also to measure the resilience outcomes. So if we look at the traditional monitoring and evaluation approaches from the program design to impacts measurement. So what is happening generally is, at the program design stage, looking at the feasibility studies, inception missions, baseline studies, and research findings and other assessments. Based on these aspects, we develop or we design a program, or a project. And then, to implement that project, we initially develop a forward-looking sort of theory of change for the implementation of the project. And then while doing so, we basically identify the impact pathways. And traditionally, we operate, to operationalize this theory of change and impact pathways, We operate in 3 spheres, that is sphere of control, sphere of influence, and sphere of interest. Sphere of control is where basically, we have the human resources, financial resources, and other inputs, program strategies, and all. With the help of those aspects, we implement our program. But these change areas and trade-offs, as a result of systems response, they basically happen in the sphere of influence. So at this stage, since these areas are changing and impact pathways are also changing, so at this stage, what becomes very, very important is to revisit this forward-looking theory of change and impact pathways, and to see how these change areas and trade-offs are behaving. We need to have a sort of real-time monitoring and evaluation system so as to capture these changes in a real-time manner and then inform our impact pathways to navigate through the revisited theory of change and impact pathways. So what is happening at the sphere of interest for these sort of aspects is like, for example, when we develop these fixed monitoring and evaluation frameworks or logical frameworks, what happens is like these impact indicators are sort of fixed, but then they are unable to actually incorporate the changes on the way we basically experience. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is, yet another framework we had published, and in a way, basically, our resilience markers, case studies, and modeling and simulations, basically, in a way, validate our, this framework. So whereby what we do is like we design a program and then we design implementation, but as I mentioned earlier in this sphere of influence, that system response basically expected and unexpected changes, they happen to appear at that stage. And the fundamental challenge here is how to navigate that change. So this reflexive practice while doing this, when we do this revisiting of theory of change and impact pathways, that enable us to actually look into these changing dynamics. Can we go to the next slide? So moving ahead, some of the sort of takeaways as a way forward we had gathered from the implementation of these studies are, for example, these indicator-based and targets and milestones-focused fixed result framework approaches. They actually serve better, the accountability purpose. However, they often fail to accommodate, the evolving implementation scenarios, and then leaving less room to recycle that very learning into better program implementation. Secondly, results frameworks are required, the existing traditional results frameworks, what we feel is that they are required to be flexible enough actually to accommodate the evolving adaptation needs for strengthening the resilience. And what we believe is that, the participatory development of theory of change and impact pathways is one such approach, if implemented carefully, that can better navigate this, learning in complex implementation scenarios. And highly important aspect is revisiting of theory of change, because these forward-looking theories of change should be looked at as a dynamic tools to navigate for the changing scenarios as the system responses. So revisiting of theory of change and impact pathways, if we revisit those pathways, then they better help develop and implement an adaptive sort of implementation science approach for program implementation. So moving ahead, we had sort of identified certain characteristics of complexity-aware monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems, and how we can carry it out. So for the complexity-aware monitoring evaluation systems, including the impacts assessments, causality, we need to clearly understand that causality in adaptation and resilience building is highly nonlinear. It's highly nonlinear. So we need to be aware of the unintended consequences and unintended results as a result of the system's response. And we need to be aware of the changes which may not be pursued at the beginning of the project. That is where, we are proposing this flexible, results frameworks as we implement traditionally. So ways for, carrying out the complexity-aware monitoring and evaluation system could include, using designs that cater to the expected and unexpected results without losing the rigor. For example, this, participatory development of the area of change and impact pathways, and using it to design those results frameworks. So taking a systems approach to understand the change while revisiting the theory of change and impact pathways, looking for those change areas and navigating our pathways accordingly. And using designs, based on the context and attributes of the project being evaluated, because, not a single, in terms of the impact evaluations, not a single impact evaluation method can be considered as a gold standard. But, rather these mixed method approaches can be looked as one of the options or preferable options to basically navigate not only these changes, but also to collect the data holistically. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I would like to open the forum for open discussions. And if anyone from the participant have anything to say from your side, or share what you have been doing in terms of resilient assessment and what kind of approaches or methods you have been using, then we would be very happy to learn from you as well. I would like to kindly request to raise hand and unmute your mic. Dr. Prabhakar, would you like to unmute and keep your views?
Thank you very much for all the wonderful presentations and the wonderful work that you have carried out. Very enlightening for me. So one of the important problems that we face, especially in measuring adaptive capacity or vulnerability, or for example, even resilience, is not having a benchmark to compare against. So, for example, in the measurement area, the important problem that we come across is how do we make sure that what we are measuring is what we think we are measuring. So that's one important problem. Always I think I got disconnected and I was rejoined as a panelist. Sorry for this. So the question that I had is, how do we make sure that what we are measuring is what we think we are measuring? And can any panelist can answer, how did they make sure that what they measured was what they think really they are measuring, especially in terms of the resilience? Because we are not able to evidence is in the eating a pudding, so that's a saying. So similarly in resilience as well, the evidence is only after some impact is measured after the project, and then we see that maybe communities are able to bounce back quickly or no impacts happen. And in the absence of such an evidence in all these presentations, how do we know that we really achieved the resilience? Of course, we have measured a lot of indicators. We did a lot of consultations and participatory process, but at the end of the day, have we really built the resilience? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would like to request Arvindji to respond on this.
Thank you, Dr. Prabhakar. Nice to get connected with you again. You may recall our interaction when I was at Terry in Delhi.
Yeah, so of course, definitely. How can I forget you? Yes, of course. Nice meeting.
Good to have you. I think yes. We have raised a very fundamental question, and And resilience being a latent characteristic has always created this difficulty for practitioners as to whether whatever we are measuring is actually resilience. So the approach that we are kind of promoting is this markers approach that you cannot actually zero down on what constitutes resilience. The way it has been done traditionally, looking at the outcomes, looking at the attributes of resilience, but rather focusing on the system itself and looking at the system structure. When I say system, it is a socio-ecological system, and in that structure of the system, identify the particular change areas which are most susceptible to external disturbances. Obviously, it is right now modeling intensive, to identify these change areas. The way we have done in our 3 case studies, we can easily see that whenever there is, like in the 3 case studies that we presented, whenever there is an external disturbance in the form of in the climate change scenario, for example, whenever we are disturbing the system through greater incidence of hazards, then the one area that invariably gets affected is the change that is happening in terms of the dependence, the shifting dependence to a new livelihood base, to a new resource base. So often adaptation or coping strategies involve this livelihood diversification, involve this movement from a traditional livelihood base to a new livelihood base. But what we are observing is that in this change, there is inevitably a new vulnerability that is emerging. So one approach that can be done is to use this, use this change, use this shift as a marker, as a change area that we term as a marker. And as long as we are sure that in this change area, no new vulnerabilities are emerging or existing vulnerabilities are getting reduced, to a certain extent, we can be sure that resilience is improving. But the moment we saw that, either through project interventions or through policy changes, if these changes are happening, if a shift is happening from one livelihood base to another livelihood base, but at the same time, new vulnerabilities are emerging, then, obviously resilience is not getting built up. So it's not exactly measuring resilience, but it is more of a monitoring approach, to whether resilience is getting built or there is, it is being hindered. So that is the whole concept behind the markers part. But yes, it's still an attempt to tackle, this conceptual ambiguity that is still there when we talk about resilience.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Maybe there is one more hand risen, but I'll come back later. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Rajanji, please.
Yes.
Good to have you in the webinar.
Yes, my warm regards and compliments to ICIMOD team from here in Tripura at the moment where I sit. Can you hear me? Is it okay? Am I visible?
Yes, Rajan.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I think some wonderful work which has been done by the Nepalese and Uttarakhand experiments, but also ICIMOD across the countries. The issue at the government level and at the large-scale investments which are flowing into the landscapes where resilience is there. I think the crux for me is how do you come to scale of assessing risk as well as resilience, and then having a kind of a baseline with which you can then work over the next years and decades by, of course, transforming your policy and public schemes and the way you are monitoring with certain indicators on the ground. So what I was wondering, going through the literature as well as your own experience, and the experience when the large-scale investments are coming, where we are not talking about a couple of villages or one local body. I think the important will be that all this experience which has come, how do you consolidate, for instance, if you are in one of the countries, 8 countries, how do you consolidate a district level experience of micro planning, which looks into resilience, for instance, at a district level? Because you want to create a marker, resilience marker, you may test it in a village or a local body. But at the end of the day, the implementers and the big investor, they would like a larger resilient marker, which works at a province level or a district level. And there could be 5 of them, there could be 4 of them, and maybe 1 of them. So important thing would be that now almost everywhere, to my knowledge, everywhere, these micro plans, panchayat development plans, and autonomous district council plans are there. And they are actually also looking into what is actually a resilience gap there, in a way, whether they are responsive enough capacities, as the Nepalese presentation was showing, whether the capacities are there, whether they are able to anticipate and adapt and even evolve better for sustainability, or whether the governance, policy, and institutions are actually enabling enough to keep on sustaining the good resilience which local at the urban level there is. Because I do believe in the Himalayas now, the way things are changing, the rural resilience is very much connected to urban resilience, the urban towns in the Himalayas, and then the urban resilience is really connected to what happens in the rural. I'm talking about the mountains. I'm not talking about Kathmandu or Delhi. So therefore, I think I want to conclude, it may be time that we do look into OECD DAC criteria, where after 5 key criteria, they have also added coherence. And coherence is very, very important when you want to deliver the resilience on the ground. So, and that is both inner coherence at the village and panchayat or a block level, but also the external coherence where departments and the public schemes can be converged to address resilience as such. And I think it's time that we try to use your experience, your learning, and see whether we can test this OECD DAC criteria using certain indicators, which are always there, and try to see how it can be, and that is a possibility to go to scale that. That there I feel, because most of the global assessments and evaluations are helping with these 6 criteria. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rajanji. I think that's a very, very relevant comment. We are getting a message that we have only 5 minutes to close this session. Unfortunately, we had some problems in the beginning, so we have run out of time. But I think a lot of good kind of comments are there on the chart, and this is good feedback to us as well. Are there any other hands raised?
Rajeshri has raised hand.
Rajeshri?
Yeah. So I think Fatima has raised, so maybe we can take her question and then I will respond. Yeah, Fatima.
No, sorry, madam. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just only want to mention that we have only 5 minutes to close this session. So you can.
Sure. So I just want to
whatever you want.
The question of Mr. Prabhakar. So I feel, yeah, it is very difficult to really come to the conclusion whether we have achieved resilience or not. But these are the kind of, as he said, marker. But and even resilience can be like short term and long term. So, and whether the resilience will remain permanently, community will get solution or not, that also is not clear. But I think what we are trying to do is, at family level, the interventions, the change can be brought, the transformation can be seen. Suppose, for example, from only cropping based economy to crop and livestock based economy, or a crop, livestock, and say some additional income through skilling. So that type of income and risk diversification, I think the evidences can be seen in 2 to 3 years, definitely. But that can be at family level. But that whether that change will remain permanent, that I am not sure, because that will depend upon the aspirations also of family. But even at the community level or at the ecosystem level, I think the resilience, it may take 8 to 10 years duration. So I think the level also will decide what resilience we are aiming at and what is the kind of, drivers and also indicators of resilience. And it has to be the combination of short term, long term, plus family level, community level, and ecosystem level. So I think it's very difficult to find out, but this is what right now we are focusing on. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rajeshri.
Thank you, Rajeshri. I think Prabhakar, you had said that you will get back again. So you had something.
Yeah, just one last thought, because you said measuring the resilience is not an exact science, and probably that's what I understood from what you said. Probably there are broader directions available currently, and probably we may not be able to pinpoint resilience to be very sure. If in that particular scenario, for example, if there are any vulnerability measurements at different time scales, for example, at the beginning of the project, after 1 year, second year, and third year, and so on and so forth, can we say that any reduction in the vulnerability can provide an indication towards increased resilience or adaptive capacity? How do we interpret those kind of results?
Yeah, I think that's what is coming to us strongly also from our case studies, that resilience being an emergent property is it cannot be captured in fixed results frameworks. So the kind of impact assessment that we currently have in practice, like looking at baseline and end line, in resilience building, there is no end line actually. It's a dynamic context and it keeps on evolving. So, and I think Jagannath ji mentioned also, you build resilience in one sector, another sector, gets feedback and may become more vulnerable. So I think the point that we are trying to make is that when we construct a theory of change, when we construct these impact pathways, they cannot be fixed. They cannot be fixed frameworks. They need to be revisited, through real-time monitoring. And that is where either through regular vulnerability assessments or through modeling-based identification of change areas or through participatory even scenario building, there are many techniques that by which theory of change can be routinely revisited and impact pathways can be routinely revisited to calibrate, in line with the dynamics of the context. So that is where I think, we have a more kind of continuing understanding of how resilience is, changing in a particular context. And that context can be very community scale or it can be very large scale. But as long as we have we have a theory of change that can be revisited, and impact pathways that are able to accommodate adaptive monitoring, I think we have a way forward. So that is, I think, the key message that we are trying to promote through this session. But very, very good suggestions, very good feedback from all of you.